You're lying in bed, your eyes snap open in the dead of night, but something's wrong. You can't move. Your body is frozen, as if an invisible force is holding you down. The air feels thick, suffocating, and then you see them. Dark, shadowy figures lurking in the corners of the room, closing in, their presence more real than any nightmare you've ever had. You try to scream, but no sound escapes. Welcome to the terrifying world of sleep paralysis and the sleep demons that haunt it. In this video, we'll dive into the chilling phenomenon that leaves you paralyzed in both body and mind, and explore the dark entities that may be waiting in the shadows when you can't escape. Stay with me, because once you're trapped, there's no easy way out. I've had quite a few, from just feelings of a presence to a full-blown figure. Sometimes there are voices, sometimes it is dead silent. But the masked man was in another league of bone-chilling. It started with me waking up to a deep-throated chuckling. Having been one of my later experiences of sleep paralysis, I knew immediately that it was that. I resigned myself to another sleepless, creepy night when the door opened. A man stepped through, in a mask as red as blood. The mask itself was demonic in nature, with big underfangs like a boar's, with unnatural, outlandish twists and turns in the cheeks, and a deep-set, wrinkled brow. But the worst part was their eyes. His violet serpentine eyes bulged out of the mask. They looked like they were about to pop. He was wearing a rich-colored brown robe, with a hood pulled up covering the rest of his head, drawing all attention to the mask and those dreadful eyes. He pulled a squirming burlap sack behind him, and he stopped when he got to the foot of my bed. He stared at me for a long moment, and then reached in the bag. One by one, he pulled everyone I had ever loved, cared about, or considered a friend. Each time he pulled them out, he positioned them so I was looking directly into their eyes. And he took his hand, a gnarled bony thing, with skin drawn so tight it looked as if he had none at all, and drew his long, sharp nail across their throats, spilling torrents of blood at my feet. I had to watch the life drain out of the eyes of everyone I had ever truly known, and deep in those eyes I could see terror mixed with pity in each and every one of them. And only after his bag was empty did he let it drop, and he began walking around my bed. He stopped as he towered over me. Leaning down, he reached to me and gently stroked my fave with his blood-stained nail. With his other hand, he reached and pulled off his mask. I cannot honestly put it into words what I saw beneath that mask. It was an ever-changing face of horror. It twisted and squirmed and never remained still for long, and each facial reconstruction was more terrifying than the last. As I looked into his violet serpentine eyes, he spoke to me. I still remember the words well enough to quote them verbatim, but as they were profoundly disturbing and personal in nature, I do not care to repeat them to anyone. But the last thing he said was, "Enjoy the time you have left, because soon your life will be mine, and your soul as well." And he said this, his face finally settled onto a single form. It was my own face. I suffered a terrible accident involving being kicked in the face by a horse, which resulted in my jaw being broken. 2 plates and a wired jaw later. I was pretty hangry and exhausted. I'd suffered from sleep paralysis before, but nothing to the extent after this accident. It occurred every night, sometimes multiple times, for months on end. We have a mirrored wardrobe next to our bed, my side of course, and I keep the bedroom door open. Quite often, I would be just falling off to sleep when I would feel the dread wash over me, followed by the feeling of someone being in the room. I would then feel like something was pulling me off of the bed by arm, towards the mirror. Then the nightmares progressed to being dragged off the bed by my back. All whilst feeling choked, unable to scream or move, unable to get my husband's attention, who lay next to me. Extremely unnerving and upsetting, to the point I would fear sleep. My husband told me that I'd been sleepwalking, and I had no recollection of this. He'd found me in the hallway a few times. Really upsetting. After a post on Reddit, it was suggested that we cover the mirror. It did help curb the amount of experiences for a while, until I returned to work, etc. where the nightmares lessened. Recently, the sleep paralysis has returned, but interestingly, so have my daily headaches and migraines. I am able to sometimes let out a sound whilst trying to scream, which my husband then is able to wake me out of it. My most recent experience has been of a black figure. Think person covered head to toe in skin-tight, black lycra who is trying to drag me from the bed by face. Incredibly frightening. In this state, it feels like it is almost in slow motion, and I am trying to crawl my fingers across the bed to my husband to wake him, but it is impossible. I find it interesting that most of us who experience this tell of the same figure, etc. This happened when I was 20 years ago, and I still remember it vividly because I haven't gone more than a couple months without replaying it back in my head. I remember waking up from a creepy dream and lying in bed for a minute. Then my mom opened the door and I could see her silhouette. Was she there to comfort me possibly? She didn't say anything. She then eerily hobbled into my room and started looking a little more creepy. She looked a little like a creature from where the wild things are. I could only see the dark outline of her body and head, but her hair appeared messy and her head looked larger than normal. I was on the top bunk. My baby sister was asleep below. My mom stood at my bed. Her head was about level with my own. She stood there for a minute at the side of my bunk bed, and I could begin to sense that things were weird. She then reached out and started tickling me a little. I wasn't freaked out quite yet. Then I began to feel uncomfortable, but the tickling intensified. She began grunting quietly, almost as if she was murmuring something. Finally, I was trying to tell her to stop, but of course, words were impossible to form. The tickling intensified until she was scratching and jabbing and digging at my torso. By then, the grunting had eventually grown into a deep growling and howling. I couldn't move or make any noise. Why wouldn't my little sister wake up and help me? Scariest thing that's ever happened to me. I have only had one experience, and it was terrifying. I woke up in the middle of the night and had the usual symptoms. However, I was sleeping facing the door, which was open. An old lady in full black appeared and stared at me for what felt like an hour. Finally, before I regained motion, the woman screamed and lunged at me, and I woke up. I almost only have them when I sleep on my back during the night, so the most terrifying time was when I slept on my chest during the daylight hours on my couch in the living room. Every single incident was at night except this one. My wife and I were arguing on the way home from church, and she took the kids to her mother's for the day so we could both calm down. I chose to take a nap laying on my chest with my head turned to the left away from the sunlight from my living room windows. I awoke around 2 p.m. unable to move, only this time I felt that my right leg was slightly elevated. Each of my experiences beforehand were different in that I was being held down and choked by a dark silhouette. I would try to yell, but nothing would come out. I would panic and begin to pray, and then it would let me go and leave. This time, though, it dragged me off the couch and was yanking me violently with my face down in broad daylight where I could not see it. I truly thought this thing was finally going to kill me. I'm a 33-year-old man in good health who isn't scared easily, but at that moment I thought I would never see my children again. I prayed that God would protect me, and He did. The veil of darkness lifted from the room. From where I was on the floor, I could see the sunlight from the window shift forward several inches. There was a handprint on my ankle from where it grabbed me and dragged me. It had 5 fingers like the hands of a man. I had a large terrier mix at the time, and he was clawing at the back door and growling like I had never heard him do before. I let him in the house, and he was snarling and baring his teeth, running from room to room chasing something that I could not see, but had heavy footprints on my wooden floor. I watched my dog chase after this thing to the corner of my yard, and it wasn't until he came back that I realized my dog almost clawed halfway through a 2-inch thick wooden door trying to get in to protect me. I blessed my home with oil that same day, and I haven't had trouble since. That was in 2012. my dog passed a year later of old age, but I got my girls a Rhodesian Ridgeback named Jax, and he sleeps in their room every night. I'd rather he be there with them if this thing ever returns. My first experience was in junior high and has continued to sporadically occur throughout my life. I'm 25 now. The worst experience I've ever had happened after I graduated high school and moved into my grandfather's old house after he passed. I had a couple of roommates who were out, and I decided to take an afternoon nap. I knew as soon as I shut my eyes what was going to happen, but I never could have imagined how intense it would be. The music I had playing in the background began to morph until it was nothing but the sound of unknown voices screaming and crying in pain. I had fallen asleep on my side, facing a pair of doors leading into my walk-in closet, which slowly began to creak open and give me a glimpse of complete darkness surrounding a pair of ruby eyes staring gleefully at me. As the doors continued to open inch by inch, the piercing cries intensified, and I was able to pick out the word hell being repeatedly screamed. I managed to jerk myself out of it just before the doors opened halfway, and I wasted no time bolting out of bed to the safety of my front yard. Feeling the sun on my skin and seeing the neighbors' kids playing in the street had never felt so good. Similarly, during one of the darkest times in my life, I awoke in my room to a feeling of great pressure and a sense of evil. It sounds cliché and difficult to describe, but a real thick, heavy energy in the air, which instinctively told me there was some kind of malevolent presence in close proximity to me. It was the middle of the afternoon, so there was enough light to really get a good look. I was in the state described above: mind awake, eyes open, but body asleep paralyzed. After staring in anticipation and horror for what seemed like a few minutes at the entrance to my room, it came. I see a figure slowly struggling to walk through the doorway, a very old woman, sunken eyes, long gray hair, skinny to the point that the skin looked barely attached to bone, and naked her ribs were sunken in. A sense of complete dread overwhelmed me as I saw this woman make her way awkwardly towards me. There was definitely a sexual component to it. It took every ounce of strength and willpower to shake myself awake, as this thing made its way half on top of me, very much like the way the Dementors were depicted sucking out the life of people in Harry Potter years later. It was like I had to push a yell to come out of my mouth. It began as a struggle whimper, and with great effort, I managed to let out a roar. The waking up consisted of me being given back control of my body and the woman vanishing. But it was a seamless transition. Everything else remained the same. The feeling of dread remained for a short while before withdrawing. I was unnerved at the time, wondering if I'd simply lost the eyes to see this thing in my awake state, and had a cold shower in an attempt to get rid of the putrid feeling that I was left with. I've since done a lot of research into this and the out-of-body experience, and am convinced that in our dark moments, there are entities that are attracted to this state. I was shocked when I discovered the night hag or nightmare was a not-so-uncommon experience. Whether they exist or not is another question where multiple answers could be given. My advice, if these things are plaguing you, is to not underestimate the power of ritual. It happened once in my sister's room. I was lying on my back and noticed a dark figure jumping from wall to wall. Alone, it wasn't the most terrifying experience. I have sleep paralysis often, so I didn't even bother telling anyone else. The next week, I was sitting at the table with my sister, and she told me she had a weird dream. Her first time with sleep paralysis, and she described the exact figure in detail. I shared this experience before it happened 2 months ago. I've had sleep paralysis since I was roughly 11 or 12, 5th grade, 22 now. I have never had a dream. I remember my first nightmare, and can't remember a night I haven't had one. That being said, I'm used to them, so only sleep paralysis can still ruin my night. In the dream I had before waking up and experiencing the paralysis, I'm seeing myself in third person waking up on a floor and investigating an abandoned and trashed, stark white painted room as big as an apartment. There are some unnecessary details, and then I grew fatigued and fell back down on the floor. In third person, my dream self was ravenously hungry, deciding I needed to break apart and eat gritty old battery acid out of a battery off the floor. Dream self poured it into my mouth while laying there, and then the dream changed to first person. I tasted it. I felt the texture. I felt it burn through flesh and could feel bone. I woke up to the paralysis and the feeling, burning, gritty sensation of choking on battery acid. Choked out my dog's name, but she didn't budge, and then gave up trying to fight off the sleep paralysis. I more easily went back to sleep and woke up out of the dream. When awake, I looked at the clock and realized all of that happened in 45 minutes. I've had ranging experiences. Continuations of feelings from dreams, such as what stated above, hands gripping my limbs, one time a sad huge embrace, being pulled out of bed. Upon being able to move, seeing half of my body off the bed with my blanket folded, uncovering me, pressure pushing me into my bed, voices, screams. I've seen a woman sitting in my room turn around and scream at me, various lights and shadows. The works. I still won't get used to how exhausting the nightmares and sleep paralysis are, or how disgustingly vivid and different things are every time. But it is normal for me. I'm otherwise used to it all now. I used to get them quite a bit. I guess school was stressing me out. Graduated high school now, but most of mine were auditory sensory. I've never seen anything, thankfully. I think the worst one that I experienced was when I was in bed laying on my side facing the wall with my back to the rest of the room. I have a queen bed, so there was quite a bit of room left. This was towards the end of my sleep, so I wake up, and I felt this terror wash over me, and an indentation next to me like something got onto the bed. I had a squeaky bed too, so I heard that. I was absolutely terrified at this point, just clenching my eyes shut, and this thing is like hovering its face right by mine, and I can feel it breathing on me. It only lasted a few minutes, but felt like forever at the time. One of the worst things I've ever experienced. The brain is amazing. Everything else is creepy garbled voices and the feeling of something on you. I got to the point where if I felt it, I would just wiggle my toes and fingers to get out of it. I got sleep paralysis too, and it's different most of the time. But there is one recurring experience that happens to me though, and it usually starts when I feel like my father or someone from my family is in the room with me, and when I realize they're not supposed to be there, and that something is wrong. It's the moment I see this man with white skin and watery red eyes yell and jump on me and attack me, and he goes away when I start regaining moment and try to fight back. There are times I feel a body in bed with me and think it's my dad or my mom, and then I just think how weird or absurd that is, and then realize, why would they be there? Oh, it's not them, that thing attacks me. Last week I was sleeping soundly, and I thought my dad was there until I realized, wait, that makes no sense for him to be there. I am having sleep paralysis, and then that man appears and starts hissing at me and shaking my arms. And honestly, at this point, I am more angry and annoyed than scared, so I angrily try to fight back. But I can't really move, and when I feel like I start regaining moment, he lunges back into the floor and cries, "Leave me alone." It's funny, but I met this guy while having those weird out-of-mind body experiences and not sleep paralysis. That said, my other experiences with sleep paralysis are usually me not being able to move with no hallucinations. But when I do and the pale man is not in them, sometimes I see shadow people, or I feel things walking on my bed and on top of me. This one time, it was an invisible dog growling at me, or the whole room moving with my bed tilting back and forth. It's weird. The weirdest thing that happens to me sometimes, and I don't know if it's sleep paralysis, but I feel like I get up from bed, and I am going on my normal everyday life. But then I realize I am still on my bed, and I am having a hard time trying to get up for real, because that experience keeps repeating itself, and this usually lasts for an hour. It's like sleeping awake. When I met my significant other, he had mentioned to me that he would often wake up and see black shadows standing next to his bed or walking in his room. At this point, I had never experienced sleep paralysis, and I didn't know much about it. But ever since he told me, I have had roughly 20-30 occurrences, ranging from simply waking up and not being able to move/breathe, waking up on my left side facing the wall and feeling someone pull on my right shoulder, having the feeling someone is pulling me out of bed by my ankles or wrists, feelings of people in my room, but beyond the range of what I can see, because I can't turn my head. And the scariest one to date, I was sleeping with my significant other at my friend's house. We usually sleep on the floor, but this time we got a bed. I wake up and I can't move. I'm on my back. It's morning out, so it's not dark. But I can hear this very deep voice talking very loudly, and in what I can imagine to be Latin. I do not know any Latin, but I have looked it up, and it seems like that is the language that was being spoken. The voice continues to get louder and louder until I fall asleep. The worst part about this is that this same exact thing has happened twice. Same voice, same room. I can sleep anywhere in the house, but in that room. I'm also very nervous to tell my friend, the homeowner, and his wife, for fear of freaking them out. I also believe that sleep paralysis happens to me when I am really tired and I wake up and go back to sleep too quickly. 2 years ago, I would have sleep paralysis so often that I was terrified to even try to sleep. If you're not familiar with what sleep paralysis is, it is a phenomenon in which a person, either during falling asleep or awakening, temporarily experiences an inability to move, speak, or react, accompanied by a feeling of pressure on one's chest and difficulty breathing. It is also accompanied by unusually powerful and terrifying hallucinations to which one is unable to react due to paralysis. The first hallucination I remember having while undergoing sleep paralysis was it felt like something was dragging its claws down my left arm. I had fallen asleep on my back on the couch in the living room, and I remember opening my eyes a few hours later, but I couldn't move a muscle, and it felt as if I was suffocating. I could feel these claws dragging down my arm, but I couldn't scream. No sound would come out. I felt terrified and felt as if something was watching me. I had a dreadful feeling that I would die and no one would help me. After I had control of my body again, I sat straight up and began to cry and had to call one of my friends to talk to her to maybe keep my mind off of the horrible situation. I've had it multiple times. I mainly find it happening after a night of partying, or maybe the first full sleep after. I always know it's going to start with this strange buzzing sound and pressure on my head. I've heard voices, felt presences, and been convinced there were aliens standing around me. But one of the most realistic ones was a hallucination of me falling off my bed and having a seizure, half crawling and screaming for help, but no noise would come out. Eventually, I was able to shake myself out of it. But sometimes if I don't give myself time between shaking myself out and trying to sleep again, I'll fall right back into it. I've been getting them off and on since high school. It used to scare the crap out of me until I looked it up and learned about it. Now, when it happens, I try to stay calm, which is easy if I'm aware that I'm having it and not still partially in a dream. Then I still try to move my hand arm and keep trying off and on until it eventually breaks free. One night, I woke up in it and didn't feel like fighting, so I tried to go back to sleep. However, I had a horrible feeling. I can't explain it other than it felt like, as I started to fall back into sleep, that I was slipping away or possibly dying. So I quickly began fighting it again. Since then, I've just always fought it until I snap out. Then I'll sit up, have a sip of water, roll over, and go back to sleep. I used to get these a lot, and for some reason they still happen when I sleep at my parents' house. But luckily I haven't had one in my own house in my own bed. I always feel an evil presence either floating over me or standing next to me. Always black and cloaked. The feeling they give me is the worst feeling I have ever felt, like impending doom. Even if it happens when I am on my stomach, it's like I can feel the shadow above my back, and I know exactly what it looks like. I honestly thought for a long time I was just messed up, and I had evil following me around, and I wasn't sure why. That was the scariest part. Luckily, surfing through Vice, I saw that they had written an article about it, and I realized I wasn't alone. During my teenage years and up until about 22 years old, I would get sleep paralysis often. I am 25 now and I almost never get it anymore. I only had one time I had a hallucination, and till this day it's the scariest thing that's happened to me. At my old house, I had a big room with one side of the wall being a sliding glass door that led to an outside patio. Anyway, one night I remember I was tired from playing my GameCube, and I laid down and got ready for bed. I remember not being able to move, although I was completely awake. I remember white bluish light coming from around my bed and lighting up the room. When I was able to move my eyeballs, I for a moment saw 4 white alien figures at the corners of my bed. I felt as though the room was moving and I was being abducted. As the aliens started coming closer to my paralyzed body, I fought through the paralysis and immediately got up. My body was in cold sweats, and I turned on all the lights in my room. For a while, I was trying to fight off the notion that what actually happened to me was real. My sister passed in February, and my ex pushed me too far, so we broke up. I ended up staying with my mom for a month until she found a place and left. It's been so hard to get a good sleep since we lost my sister, so I was extremely exhausted by this point. My mom's basement room was a little creepy, and I was thinking a lot about schizophrenia at the time for some reason, kind of wondering what it was like to visualize terrifying monsters. I would imagine kind of like the old creepy woman from Insidious almost. As I started falling asleep, I saw a different woman come at me, swinging briefly before she was gone, and I just felt the pressure. I could barely breathe, and I thought I was having a stroke. Calling out to my mom and my stepdad obviously didn't work. It felt like I blacked out, then just snapped out of it. It really scared the hell out of me, but I tried to get back to sleep after realizing it was a weird half-dream thing. It happened again in a lesser form with no hallucination, except I fell right asleep after. The next night it happened again. Except this time it was a little demon thing that jumped onto my bed and crawled over my leg and moved its way up to my chest and just held me down. It was definitely one of the strangest things I've experienced. I have sleep paralysis fairly regularly, especially if I'm sleeping alone or in a different place than usual. Happily, if there's real movement in the room, like the cat milling about or my wife making noise, it'll bring me right out of it. I've had it enough over the years that it doesn't bother me too much, except when I'm also having a nightmare at the same time. The worst one ever happened while staying at the guest room at my in-laws. They have a slightly creepy house to begin with. It's been added onto over the years and has weird indoor windows, settles constantly, etc. My wife and I weren't married yet at the time, so I had to sleep alone. Catholic in-laws. Long and short is that I found myself having a bout of sleep paralysis in a room I'm rarely in. For some reason that makes it worse, and I slowly become aware of an arm draped across my chest, not seeing it so much as just feeling that it's there. Oh, I think to myself, that's just Shelley. Then I remember that she doesn't sleep with me at her parents' house. My mind immediately switched gears to, well, it must be a dead, drowned woman, because gruesome nightmares are the absolute best. That particular experience set the bar for bad sleep paralysis events for me. Night terrors around 4 to 6 years old, walking around the house screaming in my sleep. Dad tried to wake me up, and I wouldn't. He knelt in front of me at eye level, shaking me for a good 5 minutes apparently before I finally woke, told him to get off me and give me some space for a minute while I collected myself. About 18 to 24 at least once a week had sleep paralysis with the hallucinations. The first one I recall was a gypsy-looking old wrinkly woman, green silky see-through headscarf with little coins attached, sat on the edge of my bed staring at me. Nothing more. Just staring. Dark figures walking towards me down the hallway. Someone cloaked in shadow peering round my door. A man sat on my bed stroking my dog, smiling. Probably the last one was someone with a mask walking away from me down the hall, getting to the top of the stairs, looking up at me and waving, then going downstairs. I say probably last because it felt like he was waving goodbye, and I've had next to none since then. I got so used to it that it didn't bother me anymore. Still wake up hallucinating now and then, but not paralyzed. Startles my girlfriend when I'm grabbing the imaginary spiders off her and throwing them across the room. I used to get them a lot as a kid. I remember it starting around junior high and eventually stopping in high school. The first time it happened, I had no idea what was going on with my body. Funny enough, just before they started, I was at a summer day camp and played Bloody Mary in a supposedly haunted restroom at the park with a few friends. The sleep paralysis started after that, so I was convinced whatever was haunting that bathroom followed me home. I don't remember hallucinating anything, but I do remember that feeling of not being able to breathe or move, immense pressure in my chest, and not being able to call out for help. I think I would eventually just pass out and wake up later feeling really scared about what happened. Eventually, I realized if I didn't sleep on my back, I would be okay. I still try not to sleep on my back. Now, every once in a while, I have dreams where I have to be active, fight someone off, etc. I physically feel like I'm moving through water or jelly. Not sure if it's related, but it's a similar feeling without the trouble breathing and chest pressure. One time I was laying on my back at night, and when I woke up, I couldn't move, and there were about 12 short figures in brown robes standing around me. I've seen them in a dream before, and when I looked them up, it seemed that they're a phenomenon all over the world to be seen. They were just standing there staring at me though. Suffered from sleep paralysis a lot in the past. Always knew what they were and knew people were prone to hallucination when on them. Then I had another one and suddenly thought, oh no, what if I hallucinate something terrifying? And instantly I started hallucinating that there was a massive source of light outside the windows coming in, even though it was night, accompanied by a deafening sound. I have 2 to 3 of these episodes a month on average. Thank God I don't have hallucinations. I've only had hallucinations twice, and once it sounded like my entire room was shaking, as if it was full of plastic trash bags. Next, I felt a pressing on my feet that quickly ran up my legs to my chest. As soon as it happened, I suddenly sat straight up in bed and gasped, just as you would imagine someone would do in a horror movie. It was the only time in my life I've ever made a gasping noise. Most of the time, I just froze, can't move or speak. I feel overwhelmed with claustrophobia and fight to move or break free, with no avail at times. Growing up in the Bible Belt, I thought it was some sort of demonic experience for years and kept it to myself until I talked to a friend I knew from church who was also a psychologist. She quickly said, I think you may be having some sort of seizure or similar sleep disturbance. I can't believe I never even thought of considering that. After that, I got online and quickly found an explanation for all my random nighttime and sleep-oriented experiences. Guess I'll hold off buying that bottle of holy water. Luckily, I haven't had them in a long time, but when I was younger, I got them virtually every time I took a nap during the day. Sometimes it felt like I was being squeezed and people were standing over me. Scary. I'm assuming this is why some people think they're abducted by aliens and stuff like that. This used to happen to me a lot when I was younger, especially when I was in middle school. I'd just randomly wake up from my naps and found myself in that state. I was able to wiggle my toes and move my eyes around, but the rest of my body was unable to move, and I couldn't talk no matter how hard I tried. I just calmed down, waited a few seconds, then everything went back to normal. I told 2 of my friends about it. One of them, who was spiritual, said that ghosts was pinning down my body, while my other friend said your mind was still operating, but your body wasn't, or body wasn't in sync with my mind or something. First and foremost, thank you for your continued support on the channel. It is so deeply appreciated, and I greatly enjoy connecting with every one of you. If you enjoyed these stories and want to hear more eerie tales, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss any upcoming videos. Which story did you enjoy? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments section. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Until next time, my friends.